Purple Hibiscus, more specifically the vital role of perspective and the ways in which it is portrayed in demonstrating the chronological evolution of Cambilli's emotional journey. So, to get a more tangible concept on the value of perception, I'll start with the interactive activity portion of the presentation. And for the activity portion, I wanted to introduce to you guys a new concept called forced perspective photography. And so, knowing the name, I'm just going to show you a couple of images, and you guys can just observe, look at them, and try to look for any common themes or similarities you find. Okay, so you're probably like, this is so random. So this slide is called forced perspective photography is a technique, and it's more like a photography movement that employs optical illusion to make an object appear farther away, closer, larger, or smaller than it actually is. What you didn't know is that all those images, none of them are digitally enhanced by any means. It's just a matter of perspective and lens quality and how the photographer takes the image. So the same way that perception dictates the manner in which your mind and your eyes interpreted the images on the screen and comprehended them, it also dictates the manner in which Adichie sequences the emotional growth and development of Cambilli throughout the book. So you should have been passed out some sheets that are right behind you. So we're just going to pretend like you have those right now and keep going. So if you look at the first section I have on there, they're a little hard to see breaking up, but there's actually 3 separate passages I have on there. In the first passage, what they represented with 3 different bits is Cambilli's maturity or state of mind. So we'll start with the first one, and I call this passage like the early Cambilli, when Adichie's still developing the initial characterization of them and just giving the reader a basic idea of the relationships between the family and so on. So I'm not going to read it out loud, but after reading it, I'll break down the parts that are highlighted on the sheet in front of you. So, referencing the green part, the poorly made fufu that she describes in this sentence, referenced in the corresponding highlighted section above, which again is green, acts as a symbol of Cambilli's oppression at home and the burden of her broken family. Just as, and if you guys don't know, fufu is a type of, like, almost similar to like forage and like rice type of food. It's like really common in areas of Africa and even more common in households with like a lower social demographic. But just as poorly made fufu can be stuck in the back of your throat, refusing to pass and causing physical distress, Cambilli's constant insecurity and desperation to please her father and his ridiculously high expectations of her stifles her from blossoming into her own independent woman. In a way, it traps her, just as the fufu is trapped inside her throat. Going further, we can look at the yellow section, where she does further like symbolization, but this is more of, I called it like a parallel, it's really a simile between her own circumstances and balancing the heavy stack of gravel on her head. Not many of us here can imagine what that's like, but in the comparison, Cambilli highlights the similarities between the pressing weight of a stack of hard gravel and the equally as pressing pressure placed upon her by her father. It's a pretty powerful statement to say that one human being can have as much like non-physical control over you as a heavy pound of gravel can, but that's what she's saying here. And furthermore, Cambilli is unable to steady the extensive load with a helping hand, which is indicative of the manner in which Cambilli is forced to approach the conflict with her father. Just as she is unable to reach for a helping hand with a stack of gravel, she is burdened down and shamed by her conflict with her father and receives no support from outside hands. So, in other words, she is bound by secrecy and lack of self that leaves her unable to reach out for help. And lastly, the pink section, which ends the quote. The ending of the passage creates tension and anticipation by creating a mood of uncertainty. In the end of this passage, the joy and comfort developed in her imagery and describing the way that she fell asleep and her mood and how she feels and all the warmth and comfort that she's like experiencing temporarily just emphasizes the temporariness of her feelings. And it just really, combined with the naive manner in which Kimberly's voice comes across, creates tension by exposing the artificial nature and the artificial nature that she fantasizes about. Only in the comfort and dreams, romances of herself does she both hear and see praise and affection from her father. The intimacy of this first-person line exposes Kimberly's innermost thoughts and desires, thus characterizing her on a deeper level. However, as the story progresses and we are about to move into shift number 2, so does Kimberly's emotional maturity. And that can be easily seen in passage number 2, which you can follow on your sheet if you want. And this passage I refer to as Kimberly undergoes change. And this is right, just to give you some context, this is right after she returns from Masuka and her initial visit with her aunt and Georgia. So, just diving right into the passage here, the green, which at this point comes at the end of the sentence, is another example of visual imagery. And it's, I also think, a powerful symbol. And what it is the symbol of her description of Mama's swollen eye, which was swollen completely shut yesterday, but appeared to be opening now. It's not only symbolic in the literal abuse and suffering she has endured and slowly healed from, but also in the more figurative healing process of Mama and the family as a whole in her transition of change right now. As detailed by Kimberly's description, Mama's eye is slowly healing and beginning to open up once again after being wounded and sealed shut to darkness. In addition to indirectly referencing trying to identify when the beating took place, Kimberly is also questioning Mama's swollen eye as a symbol of process of healing and recovery, a motif that in this passage foreshadows Mama's full recovery, the homicide of her abusive husband, and with him, a routine of abuse and repression. Just as Mama's eye began to heal and slowly open up, so was Mama's spirit and will to live, paralleling her children's emotional transition. Following their enlightenment at Auntie Akiuma's, Mama was empowered and healed in a sense through her children, which pushed her to take her life back into her own hands, which we'll later see. But the yellow section of this is all intense visual imagery and a form of choppy and coarse, almost syntax, and it's used to detail Kimberly's house and create a mood of exposed emptiness and phoniness. This choppy and precise syntax and sentence structure is broken apart by Kimberly's isolated thoughts and raw opinions, and contrasted with her emotional responses and instincts. An aspect that is missing from her narration prior to her emotional transition following her life with her aunt and cousin. So, as you might have been able to observe from passage 1, it's more the way that she narrates the story is less in an emotional and personal way and more in a matter of fact, and she's more focused on getting the details across. But in here she's almost become comfortable in the fact that she can more openly express her feelings. But you can still see some of that old restraint in her. For example, in the pink, in the dialogue section of this, if you contrast what is said and what is being thought, it shows her lack of maturity that she is still working on. And although the previous evidence points to the passage as a major turning point in Kimberly's emotional journey, the dialogue in this passage is still tainted by a fully disconnected and unfeeling tone, complete with obscure language. Despite expressing a desire to tell Mama her unfiltered new outlook on her home and life, Kimberly is still confined by her past oppression, and she's still not full circle on her emotional development into finding who she really is. And although Kimberly's dialogue is similar to her former self, the contrast between her internal process and her spoken dialogue highlights the increased intimacy and privacy of Kimberly's thoughts and her versus her expression. So, moving on to the third passage. This passage I like to identify as more of the post-change and post-Papa's death passage, and this is really when the most dramatic shift can be observed, especially in comparing the first passage and the third passage. You can see a direct change in the tone and in the mood of the general story, and it parallels the way that the plot has progressed and like completes her emotional journey. But looking at the green, which is strictly just punctuation, in Kimberly's closing monologue, which is what I titled this because it's just her personal thoughts and change in outlook. But it obvious changes in her perspective and frame of mind are present and consistent with the obvious changes in the syntax and sentence structure and punctuation. More punctuation is utilized in Kimberly's closing thoughts as she strives to compound her many different thoughts and opinions into a cohesive sentence or thought, resulting in many commas and semicolons. Her more in-depth and expansive thought process is shown in her increasingly complex syntax that solidifies her emotional development from the beginning of the text. Her previously narrow scope of perspective and vague simplistic sentences and sentence structure parallel her reserved and narrow frame of mind. Thus, the syntax shows a progression in perspective and emotional growth. In other words, it shows more maturity. And more, even further than more maturity, just more complexity and more like raw emotion where she has to use the syntax as a manner of combining her thoughts into one. Now looking at the yellow, towards the end of the passage, much of the language is repeated, such as, I no longer wonder, and I just go ahead. These frames or repetition of these phrases emphasize Kimberly's emotional transition and growth. The I no longer wonder preposition presents Kimberly's past way of thinking and scope of focus, while the I just go ahead and preposition introduces Kimberly's new lease on life and frame of thinking. This new broad frame of mind is reflected in her broad and holistic perspective that is able to be observed and evaluated in her bold statements, such as, I just go ahead and do it, meaning she takes full responsibility and pride in doing what she says without questioning as much her motives and how it will affect those around her. And that can also be represented in the pink, which is most noticeable in Kimberly's final monologue. And it's really what I marked in the pink is just her general shift in voice and in the mood that it creates. Her language is direct and unwavering as she relates her ideas in a matter-of-fact type of manner that characterizes Kimberly as wise and a secure young woman. Here, Kimberly is able to offer up her own input and feelings freely, without shame of self-doubt or regret, as evident by the basic and to-the-point style of her unapologetic language and syntax. Not only does she detail the aspects of her new way of life post-Papa, but she also offers her feelings and opinions about these changes to show the change in herself and in her frame of mind post-Papa. Thus, in her closing statements, Kimberly's emotional journey is for the most part complete or well-rounded. So, to wrap it all up, by the conclusion of the story, by passage 3 in other words, Kimberly's emotional journey is for the most part fulfilled. A dramatic shift in scope of Kimberly's perspective, similar to the differing perspectives used in focused perspective photography, that reflects Kimberly's internal conflict and is illustrated in the shifts in voice and perspective throughout the whole.